Week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community to share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience. Many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have. HLA programs are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur, the leader is a communicator, the leader is a manager, the leader as a negotiator, the leader as a follower, and the leader as a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil, and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. This week's episode is on LGBTQ+ for healthcare professionals, hosted by one of the HLA Live team, Eamon Rawlins.
On this episode of HLA Live, we will be going through LGBTQ+ and healthcare professionals. And we have a great set of panelists here that will provide a lot of information on this topic, and hopefully that you'll learn quite a bit. So I will allow our esteemed panelists to introduce themselves now, starting with Riley.
Hi, I am a final year medical student. I'm a research assistant in health informatics, and I work in migration and trans studies on the side, and I use they or he pronouns.
And now Dr. Brady.
Hi, I'm Michael. I use he and him pronouns. I'm a sexual health and HIV consultant. I work at King's College Hospital in South London. I'm also the medical director of the Terence Higgins Trust, a large HIV sexual health charity in the UK. And I'm the national advisor for LGBT health at NHS England and NHS Improvement.
Awesome. Now we have Anne.
Hello, my name's Anne, and I'm a Foundation Year 1 doctor in Kassel, Germany, on a program that's overseen by the Wessex Foundation School. I'm also a current HLA scholar, and together with Christian, who's another HLA scholar from Norway, I'm collaborating with him on a project to basically make seeking healthcare a more comfortable process for people in general, but specifically also for people with an LGBTQI background. At the moment, we're thinking of designing an online tool where healthcare professionals can get a teaching about how to improve their communication in terms of using a more gender-neutral and sexuality-neutral language. And also that will teach them about specific public health risks that this group might be experiencing.
Duncan, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Dr. Duncan McGregor. I am a junior doctor working in the northwest of England, and I'm also one of the co-chairs for an organisation called GLAD, which is the Association of LGBTQ Doctors and Dentists.
And finally we have Alex.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a junior doctor in the east of England at the moment, and I do some stuff with the HLA too.
My name is Eamon. I am going to be hosting, and I do a few bits and pieces everywhere. And I'm also a member of the HLA Live team. And now, before the panel discussion, Duncan will be giving an amazing presentation about his organization, GLAD.
I want to talk a little bit about who GLAD are, what we do, who we represent, and what our aims are, and hopefully talk a little bit about the challenges that are faced by LGBT staff in the NHS, and also some of the significant challenges faced by LGBT patients that we care and look after. We're the only, as far as we're aware, the UK's only association representing LGBT doctors, dentists, and medical and dental students. We were originally formed back in 1995 in this current formation, but it was formed even before that, 20 or 30 years before that, as the GMA, the Gay Medical Alliance. Obviously, it's taken a few iterations throughout the years as time has gone on, and the civil liberties, civil rights movements have progressed, and we've come to take a wider span of the LGBT community as our representation. So, as it currently stands, GLAD represents across all of the devolved nations of the United Kingdom, England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland. We provide professional and social support for LGBT doctors, dentists, medical and dental students. We collect and aim to disseminate information as pertains and regards to issues that are relevant to the practice of medicine and dentistry related to LGBT issues. We try and educate as best we can. We try and improve the state of education across the country on these issues. And we work as an activist group to combat discrimination against LGBT people, especially those that are those areas of discrimination that occur within healthcare systems, either towards patients or towards LGBT colleagues. So we're a members group, a members organisation, and we generally try and improve the state, as I said, improve the state of education and improve attitudes within the healthcare workforce. And it's a really interesting time. It's an amazing time to be involved with this because it is all just moving so rapidly. It's such an exciting and such a politically important area of work at the moment. So this has all really come into play over the last couple of years. While there was lots of work going on over the last decade, it's really come to the forefront of the political landscape in the last couple of years, particularly since the release of the 2018 National LGBT Survey, which took responses from about 108,000, just over 108,000 LGBT people in this country, the largest survey of its kind to date in this country. And it was particularly damning of the state of healthcare for LGBT people. So there's lots and lots of work going on, lots and lots of exciting, interesting work going on to improve things for LGBT patients and LGBT colleagues in healthcare. And there's lots of players in this game, of which we are one of them. We're all working, those of us that are on the committee that are running the show for GLAD, we're all working people. We're, either practicing doctors or dentists or medical or dental students who are, in full-time study. And so it's a voluntary basis that we do this on. We don't take a pay from GLAD. It's not a charity that pays the organisers and those that work for it. And we generally try and link interested parties and trusts. We try and use individual experience and expertise to build connections and build frameworks for good practice in LGBT health education or social networking, professional networking, these sorts of things. I first heard of GLAD in first or second year of medical school. An email sort of found its way into my university email inbox, inviting to any LGBT medical students to a conference, to an event run by GLAD, and I thought, wow, an organisation for LGBT doctors and medical students, that's amazing. And I went along to this event. It was in London, and I was in first year. I felt real important going to London to a medical conference. It was great. And I went to this conference, and there was some exhibitions, some discussions of relevant research going on in the field of LGBT health, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. People are doing this alongside their clinical work, and I was blown away. But then the more amazing thing that really hooked me was talking to the people that were there, the other LGBT medics, that had come along at this conference, and I hadn't too long really fully accepted my identity as a gay man. I had I had not had a huge circle of LGBT friends, and I remember starting to get to know these people initially at this first conference, and then at some social events, and thinking, "Wow, this is just an amazing group of people." I always explain it as being a medic is there is this sphere, this culture that that you have this identity that is being a medic, and medics love to talk to other medics about medic things. We love it; it's great. People pretend not to love it, but medics like to talk to medics about medic things. So you take this group of medics who also have this identity of being LGBT, which is another small community with unique life experiences, like being a medic, and you put these two together, and it's like a Venn diagram. You have the crossover of the LGBT community and the medic community, and within that space in the middle, I was just blown away by this little microcosm, this community that just felt there was a real fit there. And from then I was hooked. I wanted to be involved, and I joined up in my second or third year. I joined up to the committee as one of the student representatives, and was later on became the student co-chair. And then in my final year medical school, the opportunity arose, and I went for the position of co-chair, and I've been there for a couple of years now. This is technically I'm in year 3. Sorry, no, year 2. I'm in year 2 of my co-chairdom now, and it's amazing. It's hard work. It's a lot of work. I'm finding that my admin days are more glad admin, or gladmin as I call it, than work admin. But there's some really exciting projects that we're working on, exciting organisations that we're working with. I'm amazed every day with all the various projects that we're doing, and I'm thinking, oh, I am punching above my weight here with working with you guys, and I sometimes feel a little bit out of my depth. Feel like I'm, you get that fraud feeling, that imposter syndrome, like, well, you guys know what you're talking about with LGBT health. I've just been running this organisation for a couple of years, but actually it's this amazing group that has this wealth, this resource, that is this wealth of experience, that is the clinician body of LGBT medics. Over the last few years that I've been co-chairing, my other co-chair, Dr. Ash Birtles, we're running the show currently, and things we've been involved with, we've been working quite closely with the GMC, the General Medical Council, on various issues around being an LGBT medic and what that pertains to. So we're the only representation for LGBT clinicians on the GMC's Quality, Diversity and Inclusion Forum. All of the other representatives are representation of women in medicine, of ethnic minorities, of SAS doctors, of religious bodies and groups in medicine, some disabled and disability advocate groups in medicine, and we're the only sexuality and gender minority representation on that board, which again, you feel a little bit like a drowned out voice, but there's some really compelling data about experiences of LGBT medics in the workforce. So a few years ago now, we ran a survey with the BMA, looking into experiences of homophobia and biphobia in the NHS. Again, the results were quite concerning. Around 70% of respondents had experienced some degree of harassment or abuse in the previous 2 years regarding their sexuality. Furthermore, just over 10% felt that was more than one step above abuse and was actual discrimination in the workplace, which we think about the NHS as being this bastion of liberty and of forward-thinking organisation, but there are still a lot of people that work there that feel discriminated against because of their sexuality. We don't have the data regarding trans people in the workplace in the NHS. It wasn't included in that study, but we're starting a similar study looking at that, looking at the experiences of trans people in the NHS, which we expect to have probably even worse outcomes, worse experiences than lesbian, gay, or bisexual, cisgendered people in the NHS. The work we do regarding education is primarily looking at, we primarily work on the basis that generally people that go into healthcare are nice, good, caring people. There's a really small minority of people who are mean, bigoted people who have really unpleasant views. That real minority of people doesn't account for a lot of the experiences of LGBT staff and patients. The majority, we think, of these negative experiences come instead not from people who just have bigoted views, but people who just don't understand what it means to be bisexual or what it means to be transgender, because maybe they've not grown up with it around them, maybe they've never experienced it in their personal lives. And so our approach to education with regards to LGBT issues in healthcare is not about disciplinary actions, but about simple education of the basics, the fundamentals. Because the problem isn't bigoted people. The problem is just ignorance. And what is the ignorance? What is the cure for ignorance? Education. That's all it is. We deliver talks at medical schools, and the feedback we often get is, "Wow, this is amazing. We've never had anything like this. This should be covered so much more. It's only just scratching the surface." Often the feedback that we get, even with qualified doctors, is that it's such a vast area that simply a 1 hour lecture doesn't cover it. You barely in that time get time to go through some basic terminology and a few scraps of statistics of health inequalities, and that's your lot. It's such a vast area, and so many people just have never had any interaction with LGBT individuals in a meaningful way that they can understand how it feels to be LGBT, interacting in one way or another with the healthcare service. There was an amazing tweet I saw the other day from a trans individual who was saying that they had symptoms of COVID earlier this year, and they were getting breathless, and they decided not to go to hospital because, and this was early on when we didn't know much about COVID and there were all these bad stories coming out. This person decided not to go to hospital because the fear of the discrimination of them being trans outweighed the fear of COVID. It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing. Horrific. There's a really good quote that I'll have to paraphrase, and you'll have to forgive me if I misquote him horribly. But Dr. Michael Brady, whom I admire very much, he is an HIV and sexual health physician, but one of his current major roles is he is the LGBT advisor and the LGBT health advisor to the government. And he said recently, in almost every measure that we look at, in almost every area, that we measure, LGBT individuals fare worse than the general population. Just let that sink in as a statistic. You know, there are horrifying statistics around LGBT health inequalities, but as a phenomenon in epidemiology, having a trait, an identity, which pertains a risk, which carries with it a risk that, in every area that we have measured so far, you fare worse than other people. That needs changing. That needs changing. There's two things I'd like to say, and I sort of paraphrase and steal these from my predecessor, Dr. Chris Morrison, who was the co-chair of GLAD the chair of GLAD for a number of years before me, and he's always spoken passionately about visibility. We see at the moment a really significant rise in visibility at the minute in the NHS regarding, many of you may have seen the likes of the Rainbow Badge scheme. This was an initiative set up by Dr. Mike Farquhar, a consultant paediatrician in London, and this initiative was started with the intent of improving visibility in the NHS. It's really taken off. There's been a little bit of issue around the rainbow being hijacked a little bit throughout the COVID pandemic to represent the NHS. But to me, it remains extremely important to maintain visibility, because as LGBT people, we often aren't visible. We don't have role models that we can see. If I walk onto a ward and there is an LGBT person there, they might not know that I'm there as an LGBT doctor and would advocate for them. But that tiny little badge that's pinned onto my ID card should hopefully give them a little bit of an idea and a little bit of comfort and reassurance that, you know, they can talk about their partner, they can talk about if it's related to why they've come in, you know, they can talk about their sexuality or their gender identity. They can feel comfortable that they can use their pronouns. I think visibility is absolutely crucial, and we mustn't lose it. So I hope this has been interesting to you. I would encourage you, if you're an LGBT medic or dentist or student, I'd encourage you to look us up, www.glad.co.uk. We also have Twitter, GLAD UK. We're quite prolific on Twitter. Share a lot of various issues pertaining to LGBT health and updates on our Twitter account. It's GLAD UK. If you're an ally, please consider getting yourself a rainbow badge to show your visibility. Be proactive in supporting your LGBT colleagues. Maybe read up a little bit about terminology, pronouns, and some key and common statistics regarding LGBT health inequalities.
That was great, Duncan. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, we'll start with some questions. So can I start, since Alex, you were the last person, I'll ask you first. So how can fellow clinicians support their LGBTQ plus colleagues?
Oh, so I think the thing that I like the most actually is the subtle nods that people are allies, because I like things, for example, like the Rainbow Initiative, just having like a lanyard just to, well, A, it looks good, but B, having the lanyard, having the little pin badge, actually it just says that things are okay. And even if you're not necessarily, even though they've not necessarily voiced their support for LGBTQ, at least there's a general culture of if lots of people are wearing it, then you feel generally supported. So I think that's probably the way that I found the best way in dealing with it, because I'm not particularly vocal with it. but just having those subtle nods just to let the whole environment know that actually as a team we're okay with that without actively needing to shout it from the rooftops.
Dr. Brady, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I would agree completely with Alex. I think there are really simple ways that you can just make your allyship known with visual symbols like badges and lanyards without having to, I guess, put your head above the parapet too much. The other thing that I would add, and maybe a couple of things, is I think, and I know it's not always difficult to do that, but for those people who have sort of like the authority or the confidence or the cultural capital, it's really important to challenge bad behavior. And I think one of the things that many LGBT plus staff report as those kind of microaggressions of little jokes about gayness or transness, comments and things that are really kind of chipping away at how people feel, or taking away their confidence about feeling that they are able to be their true selves at work. So I think those of us that have authority or capital have a real responsibility to call that out and to challenge it, and to make sure that the culture is really explicit about having a zero tolerance to homophobia, biphobia, and transphobia. And then my other thing would be is networks, LGBT networks, which I am a massive fan of, and I think across the country and most organisations have an LGBT, certainly big hospitals have an LGBT network, and they do great things both to support patients as well as to make the workforce more inclusive. So I think that's another thing that allies can do to show their support for the community and for the LGBT workforce by signing up and working with and supporting their local LGBT network.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brady. I think you picked on a really interesting point there about like having a zero tolerance for biphobia and transphobia and like homophobia, everything like that. So when it comes to microaggressions, I feel like people do always talk about when they have a particular microaggression, they feel like it's not something that is kind of explicitly offensive, but it is kind of subtle. So how do you go about like bringing that up to seniors for a subtle thing that someone could say, "Oh, I was just joking," or "It was just bands"?
I mean, I think you're right, and the dealing with the microaggressions is often harder because it's not so explicit, it's not so obvious. You know, it's not overt racism or homophobia or transphobia, which is really obvious, and hopefully every right-minded people would recognise it. And often the microaggressions are only felt by the community against whom it's said, and everybody else feels like, say, it's bands or it's just, you know, a joke or it's a laugh. So I think for me, the responsibility here is the leadership of organizations. You know, they need to set the culture, and they need to be very explicit about this. So this is like chief executives or people that sit right at the top of organizations. It needs to be written in policies that this is not acceptable, and people need to feel that there is a safe place to escalate their concerns. And that's often not the case, that actually people don't feel comfortable because, like you say, somebody will just say, "Oh, it was just a joke," and then it just feels about your word against theirs, and it's not just a joke, it's really damaging and it chips away at how people feel. So I think the responsibility sits with leaders in organizations to explicitly say that this is not acceptable. The other thing I think is that I've generally found is that, you know, that again, this comes to the allies, but allies in LGBT workforce, you know, most organizations, even if it's not right at the top, will have lesbian, gay, bisexual, perhaps less so trans, but certainly people from the community like myself who are in positions of seniority, even if they don't work in your organization. You know, if somebody came to me and said, "Oh, I've got a problem," you know, works in a different department, says, "Oh, I've got a problem about this," you know, I would take their case up. And I think that's the thing about the responsibility of those of us from the community who are out and in leadership positions to broadly support everybody within the organization.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brady. That's like a very great point on the different topics that I mentioned. Riley, what was a good experience you've had with a colleague regarding LGBTQ plus scenario, basically?
So a little while back, I was on GP placement, and I had spoken to a patient and then called them back with my GP tutor so we could like discuss the plan going forward. And the patient was super lovely, thanked me for my help, and in thanking me, like referred to me by the wrong pronoun to my GP tutor. And there was nothing malicious in it at all. Like she didn't mean to, it was just over the phone, whatever. But at the end of the call, the GP tutor kind of commented on it being odd and related it to her experiences of being treated differently by patients for being a bit gender non-conforming. And she didn't make a big deal about it, but she acknowledged that it was uncomfortable and an odd thing to have happened. And I really appreciated that, because I think a lot of the time people ignore it because that's the safer thing to do because they don't want to say what's wrong. Whereas when that happens, sometimes then you think to yourself that you don't know how they actually thought about it, or if they kind of agreed, or like you just left in a bit of a gray area.
That's really interesting, Riley. So just to like kind of expand on that, when I feel like I've heard some people kind of say to kind of make it better for people that are non-binary or non-gender conforming, should we ask every patient or like every colleague, of course they would have to answer because that's they shouldn't feel pressure to answer, but like just in case, what are their preferred pronouns to make it more normalized?
It's a complicated topic. I think it's good to ask, especially if you're going to be working with someone for quite a long time. Some people won't feel comfortable telling you, or they won't be out yet. And in doing so, they get put in a little bit of a weird position where they either have to lie, but I think it's still good to ask and to normalize it because then people know that it's the kind of place where if something does change, they can bring it up and people do care about how they like to be referred to, which is important. And I think it really signals that it's a space where that kind of thing is taken into consideration.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Riley.
Can I make a comment on that? Sorry to interrupt, Eamon. Do you mind? Because I just think this language stuff is so massively important, and the pronouns particularly is like really fundamental in terms of making the workplace inclusive for our colleagues and making it really embracing of our patients. And I actually think that this is another thing where the responsibility sits with cis staff members. You know, I don't think that trans and non-binary people should be bringing their preferred pronouns to us. We should all be talking about our preferred pronouns, so we create a space where trans and non-binary people feel comfortable with that. Some people may know, I don't know, but on October the 21st, it's International Pronouns Day, and we're organising a really massive, hopefully massive, push social media about pronoun use. We're at NHS England, and there's some colleagues in the LGBT network at NHS England that have been working with the Hello My Name Is, you know, that yellow Hello My Name Is badge, to include pronouns on there. And I think that's something that cis staff or cis people need to be doing first. They need to be putting it on their name badges, they need to be putting it in their email signatures, they need to be putting it on their Twitter bios, they need to be introducing themselves with their pronouns, because then it becomes all of our thing. And I think one of the things is that, and I will completely say that I felt a bit uncomfortable and unusual doing that to start with, you know, introducing myself when I started in this role, but it's not for trans and non-binary people to bring the pronoun preference to everybody else. It's for everybody else to embrace that, so that, and as Riley says, some people may not feel comfortable to do that, but they're going to feel more comfortable if everybody's doing it. So 21st of October, look out for it. International Pronoun Day. We're going to push it big.
Excited.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brady. Alex, do you have anything to add to this conversation?
Not massively. I guess I'm one of those that haven't really embraced it, and I probably should embrace it. It's like, especially when it comes to LGBT stuff, I figure I'll keep my head below the parapet on some things. I suppose LGBT is one of them. So yeah, I think that's definitely something that even within the gay community or LGBTQ community, we can get better at, is actually normalizing pronouns. Because I think even within my friendship groups, we don't really do that, but we probably should.
Thanks, Alex. So just moving on to the other question, do you have any bad experiences that you had with colleagues regarding being in the LGBTQ plus community?
Oh, I should probably say my one, to be fair, because it actually like relates to this kind of gender pronoun stuff. It's actually quite a recent one. I'm not sure if I've processed it even really, but I suppose it's almost catches you surprised when people ask about your partners and they say she. So I didn't think I'd do that, but yeah, I've actually like created a girlfriend to one of my colleagues and she now works in finance, obviously. So, but again, I felt that I shouldn't have had to do that. So something in that interaction made me uncomfortable with coming out in that moment. And I think part of it is that the culture at this specific rotation is not quite there yet. Whereas I feel it more in other rotations where there are seniors present who do actually make that well known to everyone. So previously I was on medicine and people were wearing rainbow lanyards and they did have those pin badges. Whereas currently on the rotation I'm on, they don't really have that. So the vibe I get is that I'm not really, I keep my head below the parapet because I cause enough issues already. So why add something else to the list? But yeah, I think that was quite shocking. I didn't think I'd be one of those people who wouldn't have come out kind of right there and then and said, actually, no, I do have a male partner, rather than making something up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually bring on to another point that I just wanted like anyone's thoughts on. Because I found that basically England, whenever a patient usually when a patient talks about or a doctor talks about their significant other, they use the word partner, which coming from my culture background being in Barbados, usually you would say your husband, your wife, your girlfriend, etc. So do you think it's probably just like the normalizing preferred pronouns? Do you think it's good that everyone should really just be asking about a partner rather than a girlfriend, a boyfriend, a husband, or anything like that?
I might jump in on that one. I mean, I think that the partner thing is kind of one step towards actually asking it how it should be, but people still ask about your partner and still assume some kind of heteronormative thing. So it's kind of like medicine kind of feeling that they've got it right, but they haven't really got it right. And even though I came out quite a long time ago, but I really resonate. I really connect with Alex's stories. I mean, I haven't made up a girlfriend in finance, but I've definitely been very conscious. And I'm not judging you on that, Alex. I think that's such. I'd love to maybe great to have a girlfriend in finance, but I've definitely been really conscious when I'm talking to somebody about using they, not a he or she pronoun, they work here or they work that. So, and I think that's like, I mean, it's really sad actually to think that that's still happening just now. But I just think people just need to just be comfortable to say, is that a male or female partner, or what's the gender of your partner? It's just that people go to partner and then they just stop there and then they feel comfortable. Oh, I've used a bit of a neutral word, but actually they're still assuming that Alex has got a girlfriend or I've got a girlfriend or a wife, and they don't actually take it a step further. They don't actually really think about the person that's sitting in front of them, and they may not fit within the box that you've just put them in. And it's a simple thing, it's not insulting to anybody to say, is your partner male or female, or what's the gender of your partner? And I think too much in medicine that, we, in my area, in sexual health, we're taught from a very early age to ask all of these questions, but you're not taught in a general medical history for another speciality where it's just as relevant to actually take it a little bit further to ask about the gender of somebody's partner. Because it might not make a massive difference to whether or not your care when they've got a heart attack or diabetes or you're about to replace their hip, but it does make a massive difference to them actually feeling that you get them and strengthening that doctor-patient relationship. Because if you don't do it, as people frequently do, or if you assume or you talk about a particular gender that's not the right gender, then that patient automatically is never going to trust you, is never going to have the same strength of relationship or the bond or feel comfortable telling you stuff that is probably relevant to the care that they get.
That was amazing points, Dr. Brady. Thank you so much for that. So And we were just talking about the use of neutral terms to talk to patients and to refer to colleagues, just to normalize just like being LGBTQ plus, etc. The wider community, basically. What do you think of that?
I think I would definitely agree with the points that Michael just made. I guess we're often in healthcare, we're so just afraid of asking the question also in general for the pronouns. We just always assume, oh, has someone already used a pronoun for this person? So then I can just jump on that and use that pronoun. And I think it's just really about this step to be brave and ask the questions, because there's no harm in asking it, right? It won't have any negative consequences. It can only have good consequences in the end. And I think it's just really about that realization that it won't hurt anyone and it can only be of good benefit. That's basically what I think about it. And
awesome, thank you so much, Anne. And just to kind of expand a bit more on that, would you kind of like to go back to the question I asked before about supporting each other through the language you use and how you address each other?
Yes, definitely. I guess it's really not rocket science how you can support your colleagues. It's just really about noticing these moments of, okay, like Alex and Michael already mentioned, these sort of like these sort of jokes, right? These micro aggressions that are happening, and just really noticing them and speaking up about them when you hear them in your working culture. I mean, this is not limited to healthcare. This is wherever we are in society. And it's just really about speaking up when you think that, well, this is not appropriate to say, and tell it to the person directly, right? Tell it exactly in the moment. If you think, well, I think that was actually not an appropriate joke. And I think it's really when we all would do this, right? I think this is how we can then create a better working culture and a better together with everyone, basically.
And that's some really good points, Anne. So how I do think that it is very easy, and it's probably the natural instinct for most people to kind of, when they're trying to challenge on what they say or how they say things, it's kind of reactionary to kind of say, well, I didn't mean it like that, or something to that effect, just because by saying that, I feel like a lot of people feel like you're trying to say they're a bad person. How do you think people should handle when they're being challenged on the particular language they use?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's also a lot about how you bring it across to someone. You shouldn't directly attack them for having said something that was slightly not quite right. For example, I had an incident just the other week where a colleague was making fun of someone's surname because it sounded a bit like the German word that we use for lesbian. And I think the person didn't mean it mean in the second. It was just something that came across his mind. But I think just then addressing this with him in quiet space and saying to him, well, look, I think that was not an appropriate joke that you made, and I didn't think this was funny at all. And I think he then understood really and reflected on his own actions that way, and didn't take it personal at all when you bring it across to him that I think this was just not an appropriate joke in a way. Yeah. Actually, another thing that I'm quite jealous of that you in England have, and that we already talked about, are these lanyards that you have in the rainbow colors. Because I think it's such an easy way to show your allyship with the LGBTQI community. And fortunately, I've never actually seen this in Germany. I mean, we tend to not wear these lanyards in general, but I guess we could have worn, I don't know, like a little button or something else to show our allyship. I would love it if something similar, you know, just like a simple act that really just raises awareness about the issue would be done in German healthcare as well.
Thank you so much, Anne, for like that really interesting discussion. Riley, now we're gonna just ask you another question. So, Dr. Brady has mentioned quite a few things regarding how the NHS could possibly support LGBTQ plus people through like the actual heads helping out and like being involved. How do you have any other thoughts on how the NHS could support LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, I think enabling non-binary registration options for the GMC is pretty important. Easy name and gender marker changes and privacy for those on the kind of public register of doctors. Creating and standardizing work policies for trans staff. They should be in place in pretty much all workplaces. Consideration for LGBTQ people in stuff like parental leave policies. I think most institutions should have kind of clear equality and diversity or some kind of equivalent lead with contacts for raising concerns. I really like staff networks. I think they're a great idea. I think it's important to have kind of visible and championed LGBTQ staff members. And I think it's just about thinking about LGBTQ staff members in all levels of the process. So when there are steering groups and when there are people plans and there is kind of a conscious effort about who you're including in those and who's being represented there. And I think also on some level, a kind of institutional level understanding that LGBTQ staff members may be targets of violence by patients and also colleagues, and specific processes in place to account for that.
Thank you so much, Riley. I think you really brought some great points to the table. So another question for you would be, what would you say you found most difficult about being LGBTQ plus in medicine?
I think I found it really hard to speak up, especially to begin with, which is why I think it is so important for allies to be comfortable with telling someone that what they're saying isn't okay, because it's really hard if you're the person in that situation to say it, especially in certain parts of medicine. There is this very entrenched power dynamic. And with being trans in particular, but also to some extent with being gay, I live with this kind of particular fear that there are a lot of people who think that would make me unfit to be a doctor. And some of those people are my seniors in some way or another. And it's not actually entirely irrational to fear that it'll impact my career and my relationship with my colleagues. And because of that, I think it can be really hard to be yourself. And yeah, that's definitely the hardest thing. It's also just really disappointing when someone you respect makes kind of an insulting passing comment, not realizing that it applies to you as well as the patient. Like, that's a really awful moment to have as like a realization about someone that you respected.
Thank you so much for talking about that, Riley. And I know that could have been like easy for you. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Brady, as someone who would have started medicine in a time that like LGBTQ plus was a lot more secretive, less known, and a bit more how would you say, a more, I guess, taboo. What are your thoughts on the most difficult moment you've had about being LGBTQ plus in medicine?
Thanks for saying that really, really subtly, not like prehistoric times when I started medicine. But yeah, I mean, you know, I was growing up in the times of Clause 28, you know, and the environment was very different. But it's you know, I know, upsetting and challenging to hear that, you know, that people are still experiencing, maybe not as bad, but some of the similar things now. I mean, I was reflecting on this when Riley was talking. I mean, I think I personally have been really fortunate in terms of my personal experience, and that, you know, and I, you know, I'm blessed for that, and I recognise that that's not everybody's experience. I mean, I came out when I was at medical school. So I felt comfortable now when I was a junior doctor, and I didn't really have a bad experience. And actually, to be honest, I probably actually faced more casual racism than casual LGBT or gay or homophobia. So I actually do literally. I mean, I've seen it in colleagues and people that I work with. And it's not to diminish the fact that it's still happening all the time. It happened all the time when I was a junior doctor, and it's still happening all the time now. But my personal experience has been quite fortunate. And then I think also I've been lucky. I specialize in sexual health and HIV. That when I started in sexual health and HIV, I mean every doctor, every registrar was a gay man. I mean, it's very different now. It's much more broad and inclusive. There are many more straight men and women in the specialty. And that's probably one of the reasons why I chose it. Because it was quite a safe space to work. It attracted me for that reason. So I think I've been really lucky. So I don't have a specific example, but I've certainly seen plenty of it around me, and it's just, I don't know, it's a bit sad and disappointing to hear Riley and Alex talk about similar experiences now, that were still happening decades ago.
For sure, things have definitely got better. Like, I'd agree with you now. So if I get more, I wouldn't call it necessarily abuse, but microaggressions for being Asian than I do for being gay. So I suppose the reason why I don't really kind of try and draw attention to it is like, you already have microaggressions towards race. Why add something additional like sexuality into the mix as well? Like, being a new junior doctor is really difficult enough when you're balancing all the micro politics of work. Why add something else? And I agree with you in the sense that we have those safe spaces as well. So again, don't want to like pigeonhole different specialities into different things, but there are definitely safe spaces, things like general practice, things like psychiatry. It's things like I do gravitate towards for that reason, because they are de facto non-judgmental compared to some cliques within surgery and medicine. I think it is a shame, because at least where I'm working currently, I wouldn't be able to identify those key LGBT leadership positions. And I'm sure they exist, but I couldn't, on one hand tell you who they were. And I think that's a real shame. So I think that's probably something that the NHS should do better, to be able to say, actually, in surgery, we have this number of LGBT people, here they are. But I wouldn't know who that was out of my seniors who would be LGBT allies kind of outwardly.
Yeah, right. You're right, and that's not your responsibility or any junior doctor's responsibility. That is the system's responsibility. And it's the same for all. I know it's not. I was going to say minority groups, but it's like women underrepresented in surgery, for example. If you're a black gay man and you want to, or a trans female junior doctor and you want to be an orthopedic surgeon, you should be an orthopedic surgeon. Not wanting to label, there are plenty of nice orthopedic surgeons. That's one of the areas that you probably don't rush to. No disrespect for orthopedic surgeons, obviously.
As a person that is an aspiring orthopedic surgeon, I do find
Sorry. You're gonna change the world. You do it. You change that world from the inside. Good for you.
Dr. Brady and Alex, you've made some very interesting points. But it is a question of like, why do you guys think that is the culture? Like, why is psychiatry and sexual health, as you say, as kind of a safe haven, while things like surgery are more are less of a safe haven?
When I first started, I kind of assumed that it was kind of a joke, that people were just blowing it out of proportion. I think that was the disappointing part, to find out that that wasn't true. Because I was going into surgery thinking, oh, this would be fine. Everyone's kind of like fine with it. But actually going in there and realizing that it's kind of not. That big boys club still does exist to a certain degree. I don't think it's nearly as bad as it was, 20, 30 years ago, but it is still there. And yeah, I think I don't really know how to fix that as a junior. I don't think it's necessarily junior led, and it should be a systems based thing. But even if you forced all the surgeons to wear a rainbow lanyard, I think that'd be quite a nice start, to be honest, whether they liked it or not. But actually it proves a point that, why would you resist something like that? Something that is literally just wearing a rainbow lanyard. Like, what reason do you have not to wear one? Mm.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mean, back in the day, back in my prehistoric days when I was a medical student or a junior doctor, I mean, it really stereotyped. You know, it was all the white, public school educated, rugby playing boys that went into orthopedic surgery or surgery in general, or neurology actually. I mean, that was almost, you know, in medicine, that was almost a kind of like a similar kind of thing. I don't know. It's an interesting question about why. Some of my, it's an awful phrase, isn't it? Some of my best friends are really incredible female surgeons, absolutely at the top of their game, you know, and also some you know, gay friends that are in the similar world, but you know, they've struggled more than others. You know, it hasn't been easy. It's been kind of like despite their identity, not because of it, and it's been a bit difficult. I mean, I think maybe, you know, if you think about the nature of those things that we think are safe spaces, like GP, like psychiatry, like sexual health, the nature of that work requires more connection with this stuff as well as this stuff. You know, you're not just thinking about the practicalities. I mean, I could never be a surgeon. I'm not going to take anything away from a surgeon, and they're incredibly skilled. But their skill is based very much on the functional doing thing. It's not that important. Well, it is important, but in terms of getting a good outcome in terms of a hip replacement, really understanding the individual that's on the table is perhaps less important on the day-to-day, but to be a really good GP, psychiatrist, sexual health doctor, general physician, it's perhaps more important to engage with the whole person. I mean, maybe that's a really mean thing to say, but I was struggling to think about the why. It's a really good question. Why are those stereotypes? And they've always been there, and they're still there. But it must be something about the nature of the work that perpetuates certain people going into it, and certain people going into it and being able to perhaps get away with paying less attention to the whole person.
But in situations like this, sometimes things like quotas are, you know, are floated as an idea. And to be honest, I don't think I'd be that opposed to see, you know, 5 out gay surgeons in orthopedic surgery per hospital. Like, surely there shouldn't be a reason not to necessary to aim for that as a goal. Yes, it's kind of a little bit uncomfortable because it's a quota, but at least once you have that LGBT flag raised in those difficult to breach areas, then you can reduce the quotas. But currently that is no visibility in surgery, and it seems like that's still the case from your experience too, and it's like a real shame.
Riley, thank you so much, Alex. Riley, do you want to jump in on anything?
No, I do think, not really. I do think it's quite interesting that you have all found psychiatry quite, because I love psychiatry, but some of the most like deeply pathologizing transphobic stuff I have encountered has come from psychiatrists. So for me, that's been like a majorly off-putting experience. So yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
It just shows you can't generalize.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right to challenge that.
Bigots in every speciality, sadly.
Yeah.
So one question I think that I'll probably give to Dr. Brady, since I feel like he is quite he'll have a very interesting take on it. As I had read, men who have sex with men are not allowed to donate blood. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so currently you're right. Gay men cannot donate blood unless they've not had sex, unless they've not had any sex for 3 months. So my thoughts about that are that is a deeply blunt blanket approach to blood transfusion that doesn't recognize our ability to assess risk, nor recognize the developments of testing for bloodborne viruses like HIV and hepatitis B and hepatitis C was much better and much more sensitive and accurate than it was many years ago. It doesn't recognize the fact that, you know, the vast majority, 97% of people who are living with HIV who are on treatment have a zero risk of transmitting the virus to others, doesn't recognize the introduction of PrEP and how that impacts on the HIV risk in gay men. So yeah, I agree. I think it's not right. I think it's too blunt, and I think it excludes people from being able to donate blood. I mean, I do think it's really important to ensure the safety of the blood supply. You know, if you get into a car accident, if you go in for an operation, you have to have confidence that that blood supply is safe. But I think we can make that blood supply safer through a more nuanced and focused individual risk assessment approach to blood donation. And I think it's going to potentially happen. So I actually sit on a committee called FAIR, which is for the assessment of individual risk assessment, that has been doing a huge amount of work over the last sort of year, 18 months, got a little bit delayed by COVID, that is making recommendations to another committee, which is called SABTO. I can't remember what that stands for. It's something about the safety of blood, tissue, and organs. Anyway, they're the committee that makes these decisions. So that has just happened, both weirdly this week. So I think we'll see where it goes, but there is a general mood that we can move to a more focused and individual risk assessment approach, which will, not bar people who are completely safe to donate blood, which will help with the blood supply, which we are, constantly, we always need more. Our blood and blood products. And there are examples of other countries that have moved to a more individualized risk assessment approach without any detriment to their blood supply. So I think we're maybe in a bit of a tipping point, and there should be some announcements about that. But definitely we can be much more nuanced and focused and have an individual rather than a blanket approach. I mean, it is fair that some people who are at risk of blood-borne viruses should be deferred because it's not safe. But a lot of the people who are currently deferred don't need to be deferred.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brady. Do you have any thoughts, Alex?
I think we just got the inside scoop on what's coming up, to be honest. So I'll be taking my bets. No, I suppose at the point in time, then, maybe I'm giving too much credit to the NHS, but I assume that there was some science behind it. And I appreciate that's probably outdated now and it's very much due to change. I mean, I'm a bit horrified about giving blood myself. So for now, I'm safe and protected. But we'll see what happens in the next few months, I guess. I suppose I'll probably have to start donating. No, but it'll be a good change, much needed.
Thanks, Alex. Riley, a question to you now.
Can I just make like an illustrative point on the last one?
Yeah.
So it kind of highlights how arbitrary the risk factors are. I used to donate blood all the time. I am now no longer able to donate blood. Nothing has changed. None of my risk factors, nothing, but my gender marker on their system has, which kind of illustrates why like an individualized risk assessment is such a better idea. Yeah. Sorry, you were going to ask me a question.
No, that was a really good point. So what before you got into medicine, what would you like to have known?
Okay, I didn't know anything before I got into medicine, so but mostly that there is a great amount of joy in being able to be true to yourself, and that the patients and colleagues who really need to see you and be seen by you will find you, and that will be incredibly rewarding. So it is worth it. And then also just to find allies, find support, and to be that support for other people where you can, not just other LGBTQ people and colleagues and patients, but also all of your colleagues that experience some kind of marginalization and discrimination, because we have to have each other's backs at the end of the day.
Thank you, Riley. Same question goes to you, Dr. Brady.
It's a little bit similar to Riley's, actually. I was thinking that you're not alone, that if you feel like you're alone, you're not. And I think that's more the case that is now than it was some years ago. And that's about the allies and that they're out there. I mean, I guess that's and they're at every level, even, and this is my other thing, which is that actually, there are really, really, really important people at the very top of the NHS and the Department of Health and stuff who are allies, but they don't talk about it. So that's my other thing, that they need to be really vocal and actually step above the parapet a little bit. So I do get on my high horse a little bit about the responsibility of people in power to be vocal about that allyship, because it makes a massive difference if you're a first year medical student or an F1 on the 1st of August, just making your way at the beginning. So I think that's one I completely agree with Riley. I mean, just that's just a general thing. I mean, Yeah, and I'm a bit further through this and a bit longer in the tooth, but I just think medicine's just the most amazing thing, you know, and actually, and that's why we need to keep battering down all of these barriers, because there are many really amazing people who haven't made it through because it's not been welcoming because of their sexuality or their gender or their race or their whatever. And it is the most amazing job, and there's so many variations and so much variety that there's so much for everything. So I think that's the other thing. You're not alone, and there is definitely something for you in this profession.
Well, I feel like you kind of answered my side question a lot, but do you have any other advice you'd give to the next generation of LGBTQ plus healthcare professionals?
Not really. And in a way, it's a bit like we were talking before about the responsibility of heterosexual and cisgender staff. I actually kind of like think they need the advice. You know, the LGBTQ next generation, I don't even really want to give them advice, because they know who they are and they know how they want to be. The advice needs to go to the heterosexual cisgender people who are holding them back.
That's a very interesting interesting point. Not really. Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
I'm not so anti-cis, and no, I think that, especially coming from a private background outside of healthcare is pretty good in terms of, you'll be well protected if anything did crop up, whereas I didn't necessarily feel that way in the private sector. But things aren't necessarily perfect. I think it's really hard to tackle those microaggressions, but things are getting better. I think that's probably the message that I'd send, is that actually things will get better. Like, when we're in positions of power, we can be that change too, and we're not really that far off it either.
Thank you so much, Alex. Riley, I'm gonna get back to you in 5 seconds, so like don't worry about that. But Anne, I am quite interested. What, as a person who has worked in both German healthcare systems and also in English healthcare systems, what are your thoughts about the differences in LGBTQ plus support for healthcare professionals?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think in a way, you guys in England, you're a bit more privileged in a way that you have a structured healthcare system with the NHS as the big provider. So it is much more easier for you to put in policies in a way. I know you still have the different trusts and so on, but at least like you have a big overhead organization, the NHS, that everyone can connect with. In Germany, this is quite different because we have single hospitals that stand alone for themselves. There's no sort of big overhead organization. So in terms of policies for people from an LGBTQ plus background, it's much more harder to get them in place, right? And lobby for them on a more strategic level and much more powerfulness, because you need to do it at so many different fronts, so many different aspects. I think in a way we are still lacking behind you guys in a way, but I would agree with the others that we are very hopeful for the next generation of healthcare professionals and the young LGBTQI people that come after us, and will hopefully become part of this change and put in that work to make healthcare a safer space for anyone.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was completely enlightening on like the differences between the healthcare systems and their LGBTQ plus support for healthcare workers. So finally, Riley, what are your thoughts on like advice you would give?
Yeah, I guess it was kind of the same as the advice I would give to myself. But I kind of second the idea that I think everybody has a responsibility to do a certain amount of the legwork, and it's very exhausting being the person who is, I think particularly with being trans, there are so few openly trans medical students and doctors that I get approached a lot being asked to contribute to things, which is lovely and I appreciate it, but it's can be very exhausting to kind of do all that legwork yourself. So I think I, for one, would really appreciate the cisgender and heterosexual next generation doing a little bit of that legwork kind of with us, preferably led by us, but some of the work would be nice.
And do you think that, I feel like a lot of people are probably more, I'd say, knowledgeable about the other members of like the LGBTQ plus community regarding when you're talking about trans people as well as non-gender conforming people. So do you think that maybe education's like in medical school specifically looking at those members of the community would be helpful?
I think it's important. I think it's important as part of a broad approach to, I mean, cultural competency, structural competency, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it's good to exceptionalize LGBT people, to kind of treat it as a separate topic that you learn about for a day and then you kind of forget about it. I think it's part of working it into your OSCE scenarios that some of those patients, unrelated to whatever they've come in with, are going to be gay, they're going to be trans, and that's going to come up in their social history maybe, or in their surgical history. So I think it's really important to have it in education. And I think, I mean, particularly with being trans, because there is a kind of medicalized process, be that rightly or wrongly, it is important for doctors to have a basic understanding of what that is. But I think it's important to fit it in a way that is normalized, if that makes sense. It's a word we've used a lot. But
those are great points. No, so thank you so much, everyone, for like agreeing to be on this panel. I feel like you have made like really amazing points, and you've informed me, and I think you will inform a lot of people that knew probably little to nothing, or at least only a little bit about this topic, or maybe like they knew a lot but just like want to hear it and want to see people that are actually part of the community or are allies in the community talking about their experiences. So like, thank you guys for taking your time. I know you all are so busy, and so thank you to Riley, thank you to Dr. Brady, thank you to Alex, and thank you to Anne for all of your work today and all of your time. So that was our latest HLA live episode, and thank you all for listening. And I hope to see you in one of the future ones. I hope you watch the future ones. Thanks.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marlwana, the director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.